Okay, Sarah, you want to take over and we start the next objective area, which is
Regulation and enforcement.
regulations. Okay, let's do
Can I just
that.
make one comment for the record that since we took the roll call, Ronald Jones and Sylvia Kwan did appear.
Yes, we appeared.
All right, so the summary is on pages 13 through 18, and the survey responses or comments are on pages 84 to 115. So why don't you take a few minutes to review the materials, and then we'll come back and see if you need more time or if you're ready to go.
You're being asked to unmute yourself. To unmute, press star 6. You're unmuted. This meeting is being recorded.
So again, we will do the same format. I will give you a few minutes, take a glance to refresh your memory, and then Laura and then I will give highlights of some of our observations, and then we will have our facilitators start some conversation, and you're always welcome go back to read again. So take a few minutes and before Laura and I was talking, okay? Regulation and enforcement.
All right, so it's been about 4 minutes. Do people need a little bit more time to review the materials? I still see people reading, so I'll just assume yes.
All right, looks like the conversation already started. So as I rereading this, I noticed some of the data analytical configuration control issues here. I just found it curious. I walked to Sarah, asked for clarification. I just want to bring your attention. I think it's helpful to understand how the data was collected. So, for example, if you look at the page 13, all three internal groups think that regulation enforcement is effective, right? You can tell 75%, 50%, 71%. So it's very consistent, very nice. And then you look at the page 15, the fourth bar from top is overall effectiveness. Then you see a big discrepancies. Only board member thinks effective, and board management, and then the staff not even say something. So anyway, I just want to clarify so we don't have a misunderstanding, and I think Sarah can give us some of the background how these data is arrived or represented.
And follow-up question to that, is this saying there are 8 responses or 8 comments versus 1?
One moment while I
Page 15?
get 15. For under overall effectiveness?
No,
Is-
internal stakeholder comments.
Internal stakeholder comments. Because you pointed out page 15, right?
Yeah, that, I think Sarah, do you mean the number 8 means 8 person or something?
Yes, correct. So let me backtrack a little bit. That overall that effectiveness question where it has the percentages, that is a separate question. And I believe everyone was asked that question and they could answer, this is how I would rate the effectiveness of this area. The comments are strengths and weaknesses where they could provide like an additional narrative comment. Sometimes people provided comments for that, sometimes they didn't. Under strengths on page 15 where it says overall effectiveness, these are comments that are provided that mostly just said like, oh, I think this area is good, or I think they're doing well.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
8 to 1 though, right?
Let's see,
That's
we
what the
have
comparison is.
8 board members mentioned comments about that relate to overall effectiveness, and then board management, we had one person just mention like a comment that was like, it does well in this area. With the interviews at least, a lot of the comments were split up into multiple categories because I'm not going to take your entire narrative comment and just categorize it to one category. So
Yeah.
that's just one comment that was mentioned that said, I don't have the raw comments directly in front of me, but probably something along the lines of, this area is good.
But this is just capturing the number of comments in the area, not whether it's effective or not.
Correct.
Yeah.
The effectiveness is going to be that effectiveness question with the percentages.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, the information from the board member and the board management is through actual interview, live interview. And then the information from board staff is through email or survey type of exchange.
That is correct. The
Yeah.
staff used the online survey to submit their questions.
Yeah.
I have a question as well when it comes to the numbers. In section 1, the professional qualifications, we had 682 stakeholder responses. And then as we start going down per category, regulations, communications, and organizational, it falls from 682 to 580 to 545 to 463. But we had 1,500 respondents or 1,600 comments, or
Yes.
1,500.
So this is kind of a common thing that happens in the surveys. So that very first question where we ask them, how do you identify yourself? An architect, a candidate, a member of the board staff. That question's required, and we base our total number off of that. After that, none of the other questions are required, so people can skip them as they see fit. If, for instance, someone doesn't feel that the professional qualifications question applies to them, or maybe they don't have any comments at all, they can skip it. So the numbers that are there are going to be based on people who actually answered that question. A lot of times, especially with the surveys, people will start that first. They'll say like, okay, I'm a licensed architect. And then they see the rest of the survey and they're like, I don't want to answer this. And so they just close it. But it's captured that they did start the survey and that they are in there. So that's why those numbers look different. A lot of times, especially towards the end of the surveys, people get tired and they're like, I don't want to answer questions anymore. So you'll see the numbers drop. This happens with every program.
How long does it normally take to do a survey from beginning to end, in your opinion?
It really depends. If people only answer that effectiveness question, it can take less than 30 seconds. If they want to answer in the narratives, depending on how much they write, it could take maybe at the maximum 5 minutes. We usually have in our little intro thing, it says this survey will take you anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to complete, so that they're aware of that, if provided they read that introduction when they opened the survey. So it also depends on how much they write. Also depends on, like, if they're trying to type a novel on their phone, that might take longer. But usually the boxes end up being pretty small because we're trying to encourage them not to write novel-length stuff, because then I have to read all that and then
Does this,
all that.
to follow-up question, does the survey have an option to start the survey and pause and come back, something happened?
Yes, if, for instance, you exit out of the survey and you didn't submit it, you could enter the link in again or click the link that you were on. It would bring you back to the page that you were on. And then
Okay,
you could
thank
submit
you.
it after that.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay, Laura may have some clarifying questions from some question from board members, others maybe from external stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. So I did, under the board member comments, I think maybe on page 16, but also on page 96, there are a few comments I didn't quite understand maybe what board members were looking for. On page 96, it says there's a disconnect with the minimum standards for qualifications for testing and professional expectations when it comes to enforcement. Also, information given to board members regarding disciplinary cases are really long, and they'd like to get a brief executive summary. Oh, that one, I understand. And then the last one is pattern of disciplinary issues not coming to the board. Board would like to hear more live comments regarding specific people who are being investigated for disciplinary actions. Michael and I were discussing this earlier, and maybe can I turn it over to you to kind of explain the difference?
Yeah, when we're looking at investigating cases, that really needs to be done by your investigations and enforcement staff. Ultimately, board members are asked to sit and deliberate on cases, and if board members were involved in or were hearing reports of issues and investigations, those board members would have to recuse themselves in terms of those discussions.
And also, just, I'm not sure if this is what any of these comments were alluding to, but there's a difference maybe between the typical, or most of the cases we get that come in as complaints that staff deal with, and we might issue a letter of advisement, we might issue a citation, and the licensee or non-licensee pays it, or they go to an informal conference with myself, and we resolve it there, and it's never going to come to the board. The ones that come to you are the more serious or egregious cases, or even a citation where they're appealing it all the way to the board, but that's a real minority of the type of the number of complaints we get that come to the board members to deal with in closed session.
So I always wonder, Mike, maybe you can shed some light. So few occasions that the board's decision or inclined to make a decision that is really not already formulated by the staff or already by the judge. So if board would prefer have some kind of communication during the case, there's no legal lawful device at all. So board should completely prevent talk with staff about any investigation during the investigation. Is that the law?
That's correct.
Oh.
Yeah, the opportunity to have those discussions occur in closed session when we look at, there's a real separation in the formal adjudication procedures in the Administrative Procedure Act, where the ALJ is really the entity to look at those and write a decision for you. Ultimately, if you agree with that decision, we adopt the decision. And if you disagree, if the board disagrees with that decision, then we can have those kind of substantive discussions about the case and write our own decision, and I would write that for you.
So the challenge we have, this board is very, I would call programmatic and thoughtful, and sometimes we feel if we make a decision that is against the case resolution already, will cause huge business, impact, delays, the additional money and reinvestigate, all that. If we had a channel to communicate early, we can then express our views and not cause business impact. So, but you already answered my question. Looks like there's no avenue for that.
Not on individual cases. I mean, the board can certainly discuss certain types of enforcement cases and discuss, the kinds of cases that they want to see investigated. But ultimately, your enforcement staff responds to complaints and determines what, how those cases should go. And that's part of the delegation that's given to your staff.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that point? Is sometimes we've had cases, and I guess your predecessor counsel would be in the room with us, and that's the only people there. And so we may express concerns about things, but it just gets to that counsel. So it would be helpful if the sense that you get from that conversation could then be conveyed on a general sense to the staff, because they'd see the type of things that trouble us or the type of background we want to make a ruling. So within the constraints you described is a way that if you're sitting there, you take what you sense from the board's closed session comments and relay that to staff in a way they can use that to the extent they can in how they, if not interpret cases, at least present them to us.
There may be some anecdotal stuff that may come through in the notes that would be part of the closed session notebook, but the most appropriate way to give that guidance would be to place a matter on the agenda for a regular meeting and discuss it, which is the difference between a closed session. We can really only discuss a particular case. In open session, excuse me, we have to be very careful not to discuss a particular case, but we can certainly talk about those type of issues that you're describing.
But the plan A of you communicating that was the simpler way, but okay.
Well, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but in some of the weaknesses, it's reported that consumers aren't as aware as they should be of our enforcement powers and how often we exercise them, and that maybe deterrent. We're not acting as a deterrent as much as we should. And in that regard, I wonder if there can be a short agenda item on each meeting for where you present the kind of cases you're reviewing in general without naming any and naming the facts of the people and the category of cases that you're reviewing and which category seems to be going up and which going down, just so people here in our open sessions that we do want them to consider the deterrent.
Sure, so that's somewhat captured in the executive officer report in the board packets, and so maybe I could just do a little bit better job kind of detailing it, and then maybe I can review it and see if there's something missing to go along with the lines of what you're talking about. And then we can also, that is posted on our website under the meeting materials, but I think we'll do a separate section on maybe like board update or staff update or executive officer update and do it more frequently so we have that information more publicly accessible.
Yes, thank you.
My question is to staff,
Oh, sorry. So there seems to be two lanes that staff addresses when it comes to complaints. Well, one is a complaint and the other is just an observation for continuing education violations. Is that fair to say?
So CE violations, we open a complaint.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if staff receives a complaint, are all complaints investigated?
I mean, I don't know that I could say 100% are investigated, Mike. I mean, for the most part, they are, unless it's anonymous and there's really no information for us to investigate. But otherwise, there is some level of staff investigation done on each one.
And then once a case is investigated, then that recommendation from the investigative team goes before staff or to the Attorney General's office.
No, for the most part, it'll stay at staff. So like the analysts are going to do it, and with Mike Skinga's in the audience, he's our lead analyst, so he's going to review it, and then we have an enforcement manager, Elisa Kroger, and so they're going to review them themselves. And then anything that's going to result in a citation is going to come to me for approval before the citation's issued to make sure that I'm in agreement with the recommendation.
And it's only adjudicated at the Attorney General's level if it's being challenged by the.
For a citation, right. So if someone who receives a citation has the ability to request either an informal conference with myself or a formal administrative hearing or both.
Gotcha.
So they can go that route. So if they get the formal hearing, they go before an administrative law judge. And at that point, the Attorney General's office is going to represent us. And then the results of that would come to the board.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really important, at least from my perspective, to understand the process and the procedure. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this question is not really constructive, but I'm asking anyway. So so the staff and the party involved with the adjudication already made a decision. And so what is the function of board? Just rubber stamps of this decision or simply veto it? So does this board maybe take on, establish a legislation that allow for a board member or the board have some kind of communication during the case? The reason is actually have quite a few incidences the board really have different opinions on the cases. So I just want to let let the staff and the legal staff know.
Yeah, the opportunity to do that is really when you're reviewing proposed decisions. And the adoption of a proposed decision is very much a formal process, and the board doesn't have to adopt those decisions. We can reject decisions and write our own decisions if we think there are grounds for that, or we think they should come out a different way. But in terms of having involvement in the case prior to a decision being issued by an administrative law judge, there are actually constitutional due process problems with that, because it would be the same. In many ways, as a board, you are like a court, and making decisions in terms of discipline, and it would be similar to the formal judicial process. It would be more like a judge getting involved in the case, which you wouldn't want, because you want an impartial group, you want an impartial judge, or you want an impartial court or board to look at your case in the end. So that's the issue with that. There are constitutional problems with that.
So we are the higher level of the judge.
You're even higher, right. So you're reviewing the administrative law judge's decisions and deciding whether those are the decisions you want to adopt or you want to create your own decision. And it's very much a convenience to have administrative law judge review your decisions. Make an initial decision, that is, because otherwise the board would have to convene, hear evidence, make all those decisions on its own, and that would be a lot of process. I don't think there's any board I know of that makes its own disciplinary decisions. Petitions are different.
Is there any laws allow for staff and the judicial system make such decision that is a final, that not require this board to adopt?
I'm not sure if I understood your question.
For the enforcement cases, does any law permits the staff and the judicial system make final decision? That decision is final, does not require this board to adopt.
So if I understand your question, you mean, are there any boards where the board members aren't involved at all in the disciplinary process?
You can say it this way, yeah.
Contractors board, the board members have no involvement. It's all delegated to their executive officer, is called the registrar, and he has all authority to take action.
Ah, interesting. Thank you for answering that. Lucky you came from there.
Well, last question. Does this board, what are the nature decisions that you make that will never go to us? Is that too long a description?
No, so it's really going to be the ones that I would sign off on, or citations that aren't appealed to a formal hearing. So it's going to be citations for maybe an advertising violation, maybe the written contract violation. We'll get a lot of those, but they don't have all the elements that are required in the written contract. So it generally arising from a consumer complaint. So those type of things. Yeah. CE violations as well, for the most part, aren't.
They're more
illegal.
technical than ongoing in nature.
Right. Right.
Okay,
And
thank you.
where we felt the citation and fine was the appropriate remedy rather than, the more serious action of trying to revoke or suspend a license
Thank
for
you.
an egregious act.
But there is, it's a good point, because there is, with regard to licensees, there is a point of decision that is made by your staff, whether this is a serious enough case to send to the Attorney General's office and go through the formal discipline process, as opposed to issuing a citation, which is a much lower form of discipline. So that's where the decision-making can be.
Well, in doing a monthly report that I think would be appreciated, it would be good to know precisely what are the decisions being made, not with who or what cases, but what kind of decisions that you decided to send to the Attorney General, and those not would be a very interesting thing to hear for us, I think, to get a better sense of what is happening.
Okay, so Sarah has attempted to write an objective based on the conversation that's been had. So if you could look at one of the screens and just let us know if that's an objective you'd like to include in your new strategic plan.
I don't know that I can agree with that yet, but I have one more question. It's definitely what's been on the table, though. I'll admit that. When we have those closed sessions, I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I realize that I've just been sort of assuming some things, and it's nice to sort of air it and make sure I'm understanding it adequately. But I'm assuming when that case is put in front of us that it's being recommended by staff and the legal team that we adopt. Is it safe to make that assumption, like that the very fact that it's come before us, that there's an assumption that the recommendation is to adopt the
Actually, that's not the case. And frankly, as your attorney in closed session, I really try to keep my opinion out of it and let the board. I can certainly answer questions, but it's really not your staff's place to recommend that be adopted. In fact, in the adjudication process, there is the legal fiction that your executive officer is the other party. So it's really your executive officer against the licensee in terms of what discipline should be. Those are the two parties to the administrative case, and the board is the neutral arbiter or judge of that. The administrative law judge writes you a decision to give it's their recommendation that you're choosing to adopt or not.
I will add, I know this sounds a little bit cumbersome and complicated. It can be frustrating to staff as well. I know in the past where I've discussed with staff cases that end up going to the board, and we'd like to tell you what we think about it, or we have comments, but we can't, and Michael will stop us from giving them to you, because that's unfortunately the way not unfortunately, it's the way the process works. We do have those levels of separation.
But how it's presented to us is, I have always thought it was like, you guys have vetted it, gone through the process on another level, and you wanted us to adopt. I mean, we still, deliberate and have conversations, and as a public member, I use, the architects as subject matter experts. My hat is like from a consumer perspective, but the way that it is laid out in front of us, it does have the, it presents as if it is recommended to adopt. So, but this is good that we had this conversation, because I didn't.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, okay. I guess the one difference, as Michael said, would be with stipulated settlements where that is something staff is suggesting, or we've negotiated with the party. This is what, so on a stipulated settlement, that is essentially what staff is recommending.
Okay, and I think we've seen more of those,
Yeah.
honestly, than we have the others, so that makes me
help?
feel a little better.
It's very fun.
Okay, so do we want to make edits to the objective that's been written, or get rid of it?
Tricia would like,
Not on this one, another one.
oh, okay, so I'd like to say one more thing, so then we can go back here. So Laura and Mike, the staff, what level of discretion you have to decide to present the case to the board? Is all case, or you must have some kind of discretion, do you?
I mean, I don't have any discretion to present it to the board. I guess where the staff discretion is what type of action to pursue on a complaint. And so it's always going to really be up to the party that we are taking action against on whether it's going to come to the board, because it depends on whether they're appealing it.
Any case, every case you handle has to go to the board?
All of those are challenges.
Well, not for citations. The only time you'll see citations will be if the party appeals, and that goes through the Office of Administrative Hearings and decision is written. But for each formal discipline case that moves forward through the administrative process, you would either, unless it's dismissed, you would either see a stipulation or a settlement agreement between the parties, or you would ultimately see a proposed decision if it goes to hearing.
I think what I heard you say earlier, that a very crucial portion of the process, and that's the one I thought was worth addressing with us each time, is what kind of cases are you recommending going to the Attorney General and which you are not? And I think that's a key point in your decision-making that'd be interesting for us to hear how many of those are happening since the last meeting, and what is the nature of those kinds of cases? Are they X kind or Y kind? Because that's a crucial point in your decision-making.
Sure. So that might be something that if I do at the quarterly report to the board, and to try to give an example without getting the specifics of the type of case that we might have referred to the AG's office. It's only really a handful of the complaints that we receive a year are going to result in those type of cases. But I can, give you kind of summary details so you can understand kind of the difference between the cases going to citation and the cases that aren't. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Tricia, we had a long conversation, but go ahead. Mr. Howard. Robert.
So I'm thinking of another bullet point up there in line with some of the comments about not enough deterrent effect and not being clear. And so one thought I had was that we could, each month each executive report, we get a listing of all the disciplinary actions that have been taking place, stipulated settlements, citations, things like that. But maybe what we could do is to develop some sort of exemplar violation or sanctions from the list of that particular quarter, and kind of relate them to the realities of the architectural practice, and then maybe publish that, on the website monthly or quarterly, so that we would both educate consumers and kind of also inform architects kind of the real world things that come up that they need to be aware of and avoid. So instead of just the narrative with just that we have now that doesn't really add any text to it, we can say, describe it as a story, like if you're an architect, you should be aware of this because look what happened to a consumer. This is the real world, what happened, be aware of that. And so that might be one where we can help both educate and inform both the public and the architects by taking those simple bullet point narrative discussions and kind of turn into a little story that we could present on the web page or something like that on a quarterly basis.
Okay, so Board Member Pearman, what we have is develop narrative discussions of common violations to educate and inform consumers and architects on what violations to avoid.
That's fine.
That works? Okay, great.
So is that a little bit more on the communication side as well? Yeah. So, but
Just as a
I,
reminder, we do have stuff on the screen, so if it's too much to turn around, you can look at the screen over here too.
I'm keep changing my glass, the short version, the bigger version, so it's very busy. But anyway, but I'm inspired by Robert's comment though. If it's not too much work, is it possible the staff develop a prototype because we cannot discuss specific case when the case is in process. Prototype cases and tentative decisions that are based on staff's prior judgment and experience and the actual case. And then board members, maybe the committee, enforcement committees will work with staff, get the general alliance on this case. If we agree with the staff, or the case should be even dismissed according to the board, or the case should be adjudicated differently. So is that something we can do? I know it sounds like a lot of work, but that builds the platform so the staff of enforcement and the board's committee or full board has some common understanding. When you encounter such a case, most likely a penalty of fines, or other cases just drop them or something. For example, last time we have a case, we have fairly different viewpoint of what's going on in the case. So is that something we can do, is develop such a typical case, almost like case studies, and have boards buy in on this general decision-making process?
It could be possible, but also in cases that are final, they're public. So would you rather review final decisions that are public and then maybe give your thoughts on that?
And just redact the names?
No, they're
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
When the
Post
case,
it on our website, yeah.
when the case is down, it's all become public.
Yeah.
Correct.
Oh,
Oh, do you really, I don't know.
yeah, no, that's
I don't know if
interesting.
we want to publish real names.
We do already.
We
It's not
do?
an option. Yeah, it's,
Required.
they're public record. Yeah.
Oh,
So we can, actually, the staff has expertise, select the, typical cases and
oh, he can't hear you.
Yeah, you can just we can provide you past ones we can work on this. And,
Can we consider that? It would be very interesting. Build some kind of platform so we understand the staff's approach and you understand what's board's approach.
yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to that, though, the final decision may not be where staff started with, but certainly you
Yeah.
can see what the action was.
Well, and that's good to record too, that there was discussion at the board level and the board disagreed or wanted to make a modification. That's interesting too. Because looking ahead in the next section, I was reading a lot of the comments about communication, and a lot of them said, we never hear from that board. Who are these people? We don't even know what they do, and so on and so forth. We need more regular communications from them. So I'm wondering if this would help, Tian. Like these case studies shows that we care about informing our fellow architects about what constitutes a problem and how to get resolved and so forth. And that way there's a more regular series of communications that aren't just message from your president, which nobody reads. But I shouldn't have said that. But but like real substantive information, I think could be well received.
I think you just second.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to basically point out in my review of the materials, and again, I'm just going to point to two things that stand out. One is a question of prevention and deterrent. And so those are two repeated statements in here. And obviously, it's managing non-licensed individuals is a lot more difficult to do because we have very little authority over that body. But I don't think we do a really good job at preventive measures at all. My feeling is that the most beneficial thing that we could do for prevention is education. And so I think that those people who, at least the vast majority of materials that I've seen, those people who are in violation are doing it really out of ignorance. And so my feeling is that I've always often said that there should be a division of continuing education around professional practice. So if licensees understood what was required of them, I think we see less or fewer infractions. And so in the deterrent piece only suggests that there's a problem if they are repeated offenders. then there's no deterrent. But if the vast majority of people are one-offs, I just think it really becomes a matter of education. And so I'm not quite sure if the issue then becomes to better educate practitioners, and obviously the benefit is the public interest.
I like that approach a lot, and as I've enjoyed this conversation, and I know that we all have sort of reacted personally to some of the closed session meetings, but like while I disagree sometimes with the process, I 100% don't ever want to be involved with getting in the way of other people's due process, and so I still sort of stand on the aspect that I trust the system as the system is working, and I've seen it work in the time that I've been here. And I love the focus more on prevention. And there's even one of the comments in here that like I'm registered in another state where an interpretive manual is available for their practice act. So the fact that, again, I go back to my bullet point list of like, you're about to renew your license. Have you done these things? I think that would be a very effective and wildly preventative thing that would save a lot of staff hours and energy on some of these rabbit holes of enforcement. And I want to strongly advocate that we keep talking about the preventative aspects.
All right, so Sarah added to the objective that was just given to better educate practitioners on standards of practice during the renewal process to protect the public.
So, how about the item we discussed between the communication between, maybe hold annual meetings between hold annual meetings or biannual meetings between enforcement committee and enforcement staff to review typical case and decision-making rationales or something like that. So there's a common understanding what the staff's approach. And then when we review the case, we know where this came from, why decisions made as such.
I understand what you're asking for here. I'm not sure if that's going to be the best way to resolve it. So perhaps maybe I can kind of think about this one a little bit as we finalize the plan. It may come back looking a little bit differently, but I'll check with you.
Okay.
Revise it.
And that could also be an action item under the objective develop narrative discussion from common violations. That when the board does the action planning process, that might be one of the things that comes up.
So, jumping ahead again to the next section, sorry about that, but it does remind me of, it can be relevant here in this section too, and that is that there were comments about the fact that the committees don't seem to be talking to each other, okay? And so here's a case where the enforcement committee can inform the PDQ. Sorry, did I say that wrong? PQD? Sorry. Okay. Inform the other committees about what they're thinking about in terms of prevention. Inform them, the other committees. So what I'd like to do is roll that up and say, is there a way to have the committees meet? You know, like NCARB does what they call committee summits. That's happening in December in DC. All the committees are all meeting together and informing each other of what's going on. We can do sort of a smaller scale of that. Have you ever thought about that, Laura?
I haven't really, and I was confused by that comment in the survey because while we have non-board members on the committee, there's board members on every committee and a board member chairs every committee, and we report out committee action at the board meeting. So I don't really understand why there's not communication.
Well,
but we can look at that if that's something the board would like.
It's different.
Refer to if there's a shared concern between the more than one committee.
Exactly.
Then the committee can communicate on the shared concern. Looks like
Yes.
the communication committee overlaps many issues we are talking about here.
Yes.
So maybe that's what you mean. Okay. But
Yeah.
otherwise, the full board does review all the committee's report at each board meeting.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, I've noticed that it's different. When you're at a board meeting, it's a report out. But when you collaborate at a committee level, it's it's sort of one more layer, if you will, between just committees meeting reporting to the board, but here in the middle, there could be a possibility of having some kind of a committee committees meeting.
I'm wondering, like, do our current committees sort of meet on the same cycle? Like, do they, so maybe that would be a better plan, to get us on the same cycle, so that the communication that's happening is, like, the information from this meeting is taken into the next committee meeting that has the people from the outside on the inside, and then by the time we come back to the next meeting, those committees report back, and there's your summit, you know, and so, and then there is an informal conversation at this level of the three. So if we had all three reports at the same time, that would essentially do that. So if we could get them on the same cycle, maybe that's, like, instead of adding another layer, that might be an easier way to do that.
In line with, you're talking about the time-wise, that the committee, yeah, so, okay. So that's something interesting.
Because my understanding right now is, like, honestly, I can't even remember the last time my committee met. And, you know, if we were all sort of meeting in our committees during the same quarters, there'd be a more sort of embodied energy about the current issues and events that are going on, and we can have a more informed conversation all together when we all come back together at each one of the board meetings.
Can I also throw out a totally different idea to think about here is, if we feel like there isn't the collaboration and there's separation, is you can think about restructuring the committees, eliminating the committees. Some of the other boards don't have committees and they just deal with it at the board level. That would probably bring better cohesion.
I like that even better. Like, are the committees effective, I guess, is the question. The problem with that I could see immediately is that right now we have public members that are outside the board members, and does that go over, like, is there a mechanism to allow for that? Like, or is that something that we just created?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most boards in their committees don't have non-board members on them. We're not the only one, but it is not common. So it's traditionally just the board members. But like you said, like, other boards have eliminated their committees and just have the board members deal with it, or they make committees of just board members to deal with issues.
I like this. I think this conversation that we're having today is one of the most effective conversations that I've had since I've been on the board. So I think we could get more done in this kind of in this kind of format. And honestly, it's more efficient with our time. You know, and, like, you know, sometimes we try to rush through some of these meetings, but maybe if we add a couple more hours onto them and reduce some of the committee commitments, but add on to the quarterly commitments, that might be more effective.
Let's capture what you said before we forget, and then I will have some response to you. So looks like synchronize, the words will be the synchronize the committee meeting.
Schedule, yes, committee schedule. That'd be one idea.
Yeah.
And reporting, synchronize the meeting and board and committee meeting schedule, and reporting of committee findings at the board meeting.
I'd like
something like to that.
I like that, but I'd like to also, I like Sylvia's idea of having the head of each committee talking to each other before each full board meeting, and 2 weeks before, so it's fresh, or and they're having a discussion of what their committees did, how they overlapped, how they may disagree, and then we hear a more full discussion at the board rather than just a report back. I like the idea that committees have non-board members, because I get more input from the public that way.
Exactly.
And I also fear that our board meetings go much too long. I don't particularly like extra hours to a board meeting, because I just find the return goes down as the hours go up in terms of attention and efficiency.
So we'll certainly do whatever the board desires. I think on that comment, it's all about how you structure the board meeting and how you spend your time. We have this much time available, and so we use it. If you have more issues to take up during the day, we would just probably use our time a little bit differently. And most of the committee members are other licensees. They're not members of the public. So we're not really bringing in more public input through the committee process. We're bringing in more licensee input.
Right, that's
okay,
just,
too.
that's good.
Yeah.
One of the points of frustration that I've had is some of our key issues seem to get bogged down in committee. Like the issue that's being discussed will sort of be tabled at the meeting because a committee is taking it up. And then honestly, the committee goes and they deal with it and they bring it back, and I've seen it go back even in the short time that I've been here. You know, I've seen it go back, and so it just seems to be like a way to kill a conversation instead of enhance the conversation. And I think what we're doing today is so much more effective. I think we could have, made a couple of decisions, thought about it, come back to the next meeting, and everybody would have sort of wrapped their head around whether or not they believed in it or not, and we could sort of vote some things forward. I'm liking the more efficient process personally.
And there's always the option of creating like a task force for limited issues, like maybe a CE where it really required more time to study, but that would be sort of a hybrid in between just having a board without committees and the true committee structure.
Well, I like that. So can I want to read this one comment, which is, I brought it up before lunch, but this comment really hits to the heart of the matter. It says, with new and more regulations constantly being created year after year, I think it is just as vital to have the same degree of older and outdated regulations removed or reformed. Then eventually our hands will be tied so tightly that construction will be nearly impossible. And human architectural design creativity will be killed. Some kind of balance needs to be studied and hopefully someday implemented. So that's dramatic, but the idea is correct. That's what I'm afraid of, is the pile on. And I wanted to, because it's part of this section, isn't it? Regulation is legislation too, right? Yes? Because where else would it fit?
Qualifications.
Huh?
Qualifications.
Well, that's also how we're regulated, like youth out, right? So I want to bring it up in this section to say that we really need to figure out how to streamline the whole idea of the legislative process with regard to continuing education.
Just as far as the metrics are concerned, I just want to remind everybody that this category scored really high on everybody's feeling that things were going well, and even amongst ourselves, we scored much higher than our discussions are sort of portraying. So, like, I'm wondering if this is is this the category that we focus on for change? Like, is change necessary in this category? Is my question.
Well, especially, it's always been yes, because this board, even before you were here, we were concerned about the single issue CE, okay? And then with the addition of the new, the 1010, it suddenly made it even more clear that it's just a pile-on, and there's no real study of how it should be done holistically, with the view, like how should the CE process work?
I completely agree with that, but how does that relate to regulation?
Because it's regulated by the legislators. I'm just asking if that is correct, if I'm putting in the correct category.
I think our staff is well, yeah, but like as far as like regulation and enforcement,
It's not the enforcement, it's the regulation of our practice, which includes continuing education. So if it's in the wrong category, I'm okay to,
No, I hear what you're saying. So you're advocating now to the conversation that we had in the beginning, the professional qualifications, to continue the conversation about
on the legislative side.
The legislative side, how to get more flexibility with the. So I think we have that note, and so the question is, can that be put in a couple of different categories, because it is important. I mean, we put it in the qualifications earlier. Should we move it from qualifications to regulation? I agree.
Okay, let me ask, if I can ask just a point of clarification. Are all continuing education requirements legislative? I mean, are they required to be legislative?
They are now, yes.
No, not are they. Are they required to be legislative?
No.
So because legislation,
I think,
because legislation really has no end.
That's right.
Right, so we're bound by that, the
I know.
continuing education. But I guess my question is that, can the board establish continuing education requirements that are not legislative?
Hold that thought for a second. Hold your breath.
Hold that thought. Candy break. I have 1/8 of a cookie left.
That mine's still in the box.
I stress chewed it.
Well, I'll stress you on my way home.
So,
Okay, so, now my mind went blank, I know what you asked. We don't have the ability to adopt more CE requirements in regulation. We can only adopt regulations to make statute more specific, and we don't have legislation or statutory authority to establish any CE beyond what's already there.
Gotcha.
yeah, so in other words, we needed to do the same as AIA do if we want implementing our ideas.
But when we've discussed this in the past, we can certainly make the recommendation for another round to an author of a bill, or, so we can certainly spearhead the process for whatever we think is necessary. We can work with the AIA, we can work with lawmakers, to sort of educate them for like what if we wanted to do that, if we wanted to guide that process and go through that. Just getting back to the AIA, that's why it was really easy, because they sort of took the lead and they did it, and we all believed in the cause, and we certainly didn't get in the way. We all sort of agreed and accepted it and liked it. But
And the reason that this is important to me is because both of the current continuing education requirements are also informed by the building codes. Cal Green and Chapter 1111B, 1111B of the CBC, they guide accessibility and green standards. But there are other things that we are not, there's just no checks and balances on some of the other things. So at least we have the ability to have jurisdictions enforce the application of the other two provisions. But there are other areas that we just aren't addressing at all.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah, Ebony, you have raised your hand.
Oh, if we're going to inform legislation on other things, I was wondering if we could revisit the fines, because they're so low.
Revisit what?
So
Like,
she's talking about a citation and fine amount, right?
Citations and fine amount. And I don't know if this goes through sunset, but when we're having talks about, bringing anything to the legislators, I think we should also cover that subject matter.
Okay, it would be a good issue for sunset. It is something that applies to all DCA boards, so we probably wouldn't get something that's just an increase for us. But I can I don't know that it's been considered recently, but I will do a little bit of research, and we can put that on there and see where we can go with that. Do you have anything to add to that?
If I could just jump in, the environmental scan did, one of the weaknesses that was pointed out was how low the fines are and that they're not a deterrent, so.
But I wonder, before we get into fines, can we update the facilitator chart? We didn't put anything there about, we discussed committees for about 10 plus minutes, and we didn't put anything up there. Can we do that before we move on?
Yes, Sarah actually was typing during that time, so she did write down some of the information, but she will need it fleshed out.
Well,
So I felt like it fell under the organizational relationships and effectiveness, since it was dealing with committees.
yeah. Would anyone like to restate what they thought the consensus was on the committee discussion?
I think you restated it really well,
Okay.
whatever I said.
Does anyone mind if I restate it? Yeah, go ahead. Well, I think we decided that committees would meet in the same quarter, so they sync up, and that would facilitate the other thing, which was to have a discussion among committee heads. And I don't know if this is a Brown Act violation or not. Maybe Michael can tell us, but a conversation among committee heads in the weeks before our quarterly board meeting about what occurred during summarizing to each other and discussing what occurred at their committees that was in common and indifferent, and what their next agendas might be.
Yeah, certainly two members of the board who may also be chairs of a committee can meet and discuss items. When you add a third person, that's where it becomes an Open Meetings Act violation and becomes a board meeting that needs to be noticed and gone through the public process like our meeting is.
So the question, so we have 3 committees, do we? Standing committees?
We have 4, but 3 main ones. So we have professional qualifications, regulatory enforcement committee, communications. We also have an executive committee which is a good question, a good point. That landscape architect technical committee is a committee. It is structured different in statute, but it is also a committee that reports to the board.
We'll have a big talk on that too. So to answer your question, early question, Sunny, is the enforcement categories actually perform well. We just had the questions. We want to have advantage of conversation with Mike. So we carry away a little bit, and we can really streamline this and move on to the next objective area. But before we do that, any other comments on
Regulatory?
Regulatory objective? Okay.
I was going to suggest one of the goals, just because the whole social media website thing is still out there. I'm not sure that we've got a handle on it. All we did was talk about the advertising and the business cards also. I would like the committee to continue to have a goal of really monitoring the whole social media website advertising universe so that we can continue to educate the practice and the consumers about, the pitfalls, et cetera, what's legal in that sphere. Because I think we don't have a great handle on it, but we got to really deal with it proactively. So I'd like to be a specific goal going forward of rec.
This is a question for Laura. In relation to that, do we have any proactive regulation, or is it all reactive? So in other words, someone applies for a license, they're audited, they didn't complete their hours, a client calls, says their architect's not licensed. So we don't currently have any sort of proactive enforcement right now. Is that right?
No, I would say we don't have any official proactive. It might be that we see it from newspaper articles or the references to architects, or staff sees something and they're going to investigate it on their own.
Right.
But we don't have a program. I would say that's probably more common amongst boards than.
Yeah, and then Robert, to your point, are you looking for proactive regulation or just proactive communication?
I wouldn't limit it to either. Just want to make sure it's a goal of us to continue to monitor that social media website universe in terms of architect advertising. It might just be education. It might be pushing regulation and legislation. Before we went with the fact that we were restricted to go after the website hosts, for example, but maybe the law landscape changed, and that's something we could go for in the future. So I'd be a little more open-ended than that.
Okay.
Good. Actually, I'd expand a little bit on the early provisions. We talk about inter-committee working relationship. I think we have option of not regularly make board meeting have a session, just talk about the inter-committee work, but make a special meeting when a year or a period is necessary, have key issues that between committee needed to discuss. We can call for a full board meeting, and the subject matter is just committee work. So
Is that possible?
nothing prevents us to do that, right, Laura? We can always ask for one more board meeting.
So you're saying you'd have one more board meeting a year to talk about?
Just talk about the committee issues.
Sure, you could do that, or typically we wouldn't have this one-day strategic planning meeting. We would normally have a 2-day meeting. So once a year we could have a 2-day meeting instead of just a 1-day meeting if you want a longer discussion, instead of having a 5th board meeting a year.
Mm-hmm. I go back to Laura's suggestion as well. So if we're going to keep the committees, then why not have them all meet at the same place on the same site?
Okay.
And bring together the results right afterwards. So that would effectively be removing the committees, but if we wanted to still circle up in smaller groups and talk about it, great.
Okay.
But then we could immediately sort of share the information, and that just seems like it would be more effective to me.
Okay.
I'm just concerned about these things getting sort of
Delayed a
table.
lot,
Things
yeah.
just seem to get tabled around here and stuck back to committee.
And I think it's because of delay. I really do. That so much time passes
Yes.
in between our communications with each other in terms of committee. So I like that idea of the 2-day, and then the committees will have met just before that. See, and also there lies some efficiency as well, because you don't have to travel, the whole thing. It's just trying to get, because I know that for committees, people travel. They either fly or drive or whatever up to Sacramento for all committee meetings, correct?
In normal times.
I
yes.
mean, in normal
Yeah.
times, yeah. So there's travel anyway with all the non-board members that come up.
If we
Right.
did it this way, we could still have non-board members.
Correct.
Yes.
I really like having non-board members, Laura, because what it does is it expands the participation. Can you imagine what people would say if it was just all board committees? Talk about no communication from us. That's our complaint right now.
Well, I would say that the non-board members bring in some additional perspective. It's still limited in terms of the people you have, right? I mean, it's
So you're suggesting that one time a year, we have a 2-day board session with the first day being the board listening to all the committees at a public session? Is that the thought?
I don't know. I'm still going back to, this is the best meeting I've had since we've been meeting because it's informal. I feel like I understand each and everyone's sort of concerns. And so I'd much rather have one big giant committee meeting with you all to deal with all the issues as efficiently as possible.
That's good.
And remove the committees. I still am going back to that idea of removing committees and sort of dealing with these as topics. Like that we're all on the same committees and we sort of, I don't know. I liked Laura's idea earlier. It felt really efficient to me and more communicative between the entire group.
Can you verbalize this here?
Well,
So to simply remove the committees.
but see, I see a problem with that because committees do work.
Yeah, what do you mean?
You're not just
No more-
reporting.
Dissolve
We
committee?
would still be doing the work.
They
We'd have a working day like this where we deal with each one of those committee topics separated. That would be the day.
But
Just like we're doing today, almost.
And if it's fair, Sonny may be just saying, how effective are we as committees? And if we're less effective as committees as opposed to having a larger conversation and then having working groups attack some of the issues, I think the question is whether that would be more effective there.
There could be individuals in this board that represent our current committees, that sort of do the work on the topics, that take the notes, that sort of spearhead the discussion. But everybody would be at the table.
That's new concept.
Yeah, it's
I
a big
think
one.
about it.
we might not resolve this issue today, but I do think it
Yeah.
warrants further consideration. I think there are strengths, but also weaknesses to our existing committee
Yeah.
structure. And certainly the delay in getting issues resolved that Sunny mentioned is
I
very
do like the
valid.
one thing that we've talked about, which would getting us on sync. So I think at a minimum, that would make me feel a lot better about the conversation. I feel like we could make more progress. So at a minimum, I still like that idea as well.
I think
Yeah.
we could do a little bit more, like staff can do a little bit more research, could maybe discuss some options, kind of look and present you some more options for you to decide at a later date, but we probably have to move on to our.
Can I ask one more question though? I want to go back to the strategic plan from last year, or the current strategic plan in 2.1. It talks about, responsible control and aiding and abetting. So it seems that we haven't necessarily, and protecting the consumer from unlicensed practitioners, we haven't necessarily addressed that. And so in this conversation at all, and if that was a goal, part of the strategic plan for the current plan, what progress have we made in that area? And then are we basically advancing it under this new conversation?
I don't have my update on the objectives from the current plan with me. I think on this one, we did a informational bulletin to licensees on this topic. I'd have to double check.
And there was
But-
some regulation clarification
Yeah.
on both points, I think. So I suspect that was, the goal was to attack it at that time, and it was done both in regs and just this
Yeah,
information.
I don't think there was a need to carry it forward, but I can report back.
And I would just be curious about measurable kind of measures, I mean, how do you evaluate the success of those efforts?
Yeah, that's challenging.
And I say that only because these are three really important issues, particularly in the residential design space. And it's not uncommon for architects to be, I work for large public builders. It's not uncommon for architects to work for design builders or for other general contractors where we have little or no contact with the consumer.
Right.
And so ultimately the question is, what is the practitioner's responsibility to the end user in those scenarios? So that's responsible control and
Yes,
those relationships.
and that is an issue I think we would want to include on this plan or for you to consider is that in those types of situations, who is the consumer? Who does the architect have responsibility to? Who's protected under the act?
Right.
Yeah.
So this is wrong, just so you know, maybe my part have not pushed hard enough. That is the next agenda for the PQC to work on, since they successfully work on the continuing education. And that's another reason, Sunny, I would not, at the moment, think about the dissolve committee. If the structure right, if we give them a specific task, they can do. Some of the weakness of some committees, the structure is not good enough. We're not giving them a specific task, so we need to improve this today. So, but I do like the idea of have an assembly of committee when there's a converge issues that shared by more than one committee. And that format can be flexible, can be a board meeting, can be a one-day workshop, can be a part of strategic planning. So let's leave that open. Okay? Yeah. So, all right, if y'all okay, we're moving on to next objective. Public comment. Oh, public comment.
All right, so shall we go back to regulation and enforcement and just take a quick look? We had 4 objectives, I believe. 3, okay, 5. Oh, well, we actually have 3 and then a couple that are unfinished. So if we could just take a look at these, and if you want to keep the last 2, then we need to have a benefit for them.
Yeah, I think the fourth one, we've discussed the communication before in that more global sense. I think I would drop it from here is my view.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add the one that I just mentioned about responsible control and the responsibility of the practitioner to the consumer. And I think Laura's point is a really good one. Who is the consumer in those scenarios?
Okay, and so what would you say was the action there would be, like define?
Define or review, yeah.
Define, review, okay, define, okay.
But this is wrong, this is more of PQC role.
No, it is an REC role.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Good.
and then it was define the role,
Of the practitioner in their relationship, direct or indirect relationship to the consumer.
okay, the role of the practitioner, their indirect relationship to the consumer, and then the benefit of that would be?
And I go back to the qualifications again,
Okay.
on better understanding our professional practice responsibilities, and to protect the public's interest.
Can I ask Ron to be more specific? As a non-architect, I'm not sure I understand what that means, the role of the practitioner and their indirect relationship to the consumer.
Yeah, so
What
good,
does that
good
mean?
question. So oftentimes an architect is hired by a general contractor to design a house that they're going to sell to the consumer. So there was one particular case that was brought before the board in which the consumer basically said they never met with the architect. But the homeowner said, I never met with the architect. Well, the question is, what was the architect's responsibility to that homebuyer? Should there be because a contractual relationship between the architect in that scenario is with the general contractor. So is the general contractor by default the consumer, or is the home buyer who buys the house the consumer?
With whom he has no legal contract.
Correct. So then the question is direct or indirect relationship between the end user.
Thank you.
Can I jump on this, make my case again on climate resiliency? This is perhaps the best opportunity I say this, is if a builder asks you design something and you advise them, according to the common practice today, we take 500 years of a floodplain as our design base. The builder says, no, my city have not said specifically design per 100 years of flood base. that is exactly you get into trouble. You don't have a direct responsible control.
Right.
And when the building flooded, the first reaction, who is the architect?
Right.
So that is best illustration.
Okay, so we have defined the role of the practitioner and their indirect relationship to the consumer, and for a benefit, we have to better educate the public. Are we okay with that benefit, or do we want to expand upon
And the
it?
practitioner, because again, this comes back
And
to
the
the whole idea of
practitioner.
preventive issues for practitioners. We want to make sure that they understand their risk.
Well, but shouldn't the goal be to define it, not just to discuss the role, but?
Well, that's what, the action is to define it.
The action is
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Okay.
Yeah, so that the consumer understands that there's always a third-party relationship of some sort, but it's never in the contract. So how does it resolve itself?
But however, though, Ron, I don't think Architects Board has that jurisdiction.
Correct.
At least we don't have a direct or sole jurisdiction on it. We can work with the allied professionals and legislators.
And I think the important thing in this particular case, as you said, Tien, is that the architect needs to understand that regardless of whether or not they have a contractual relationship with the general contractor, the instruments of service is the documents themselves. And so that's where the litigation comes back to, is that whether or not the documents were actually developed and developed under responsible control of the architect, but under contract with someone else other than the end user.
Okay.
Very complicated.
All right, and then there was a suggestion for increasing the fines. So recommend legislation to increase fines. Did you want to have an objective that dealt with that?
Yeah.
And
I
if
think
so,
the-
what benefit?
Wouldn't the benefit be to to something like demonstrate the severity of their crime? Increase the what?
Deterrence.
Oh, to increase deterrence to misbehavior or whatever the word is.
Okay.
Okay, I
Increase
have a couple of thoughts on that. One is, you can't, I don't think you can discuss increasing the fines without discussing the threshold for when you get fined to begin with. And number two, the threshold for when fines aren't enough. And you want to get into the discussion of temporary or permanent, cessation of practice.
Revocation.
Thank you. So maybe we just expand it in that way, because I think you can't discuss one without the others.
So what you're saying is it's not just the monetary fine, but it's also the entire
It's when it's triggered.
punishment.
It's when it's triggered and when the next step is triggered beyond fines, which
Let's not be broader,
which
I
is
think.
revocation, temporary or permanent.
Yeah, why don't you give them a broader scope here?
You mean, okay.
Yeah.
To legislate the amount of fines and the threshold. Well, I'm under issue right now. To legislate the when fines are triggered, the amount of fines, and when the appropriate time is to consider more than fines, actions beyond fines. And what's the threshold, for action beyond fines? The appropriate threshold for fines and the appropriate threshold for action beyond fines. To legislate.
If I can add in here, the board does have disciplinary guidelines that define sort of the parameters of what action we will look for depending on the type of violation.
And I think we should look at those.
And you want to bring those back to the board?
I'd like to understand them.
Okay.
We may not act on changing them, but I'd sure like to understand them better.
Okay, we can put it as a future item. I think they're actually in process, the regulations to revise them now. But we'll either put it on the agenda or send it out so you can look at them and determine then what action the board would like to take.
So let's put it on there. I'll repeat it, the appropriate threshold for fines and the appropriate threshold for action beyond fines and increasing the amount of fines. And then the action would be, as Laura put it, what were your words, Laura?
It was so long ago. To determine whether you want to make revisions to the disciplinary guidelines?
Yeah, determine is under action, benefit is deterrent. Benefit's deterrent, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say deterrence and increased consumer protection.
Okay, I think that does it.
Okay, and then I think we had one more objective that had been suggested on the following slide. So, and that is continue to monitor social media for unlicensed advertising to enforce proactively against unlicensed advertising.
Do we have dedicated staff to do that?
It would just be the enforcement staff, just part of their workload. But separate from communication staff dealing with social media.
We're currently already doing it, right?
And the internet's huge. How do you
Yeah.
navigate that?
Yeah,
I mean,
you can only,
like, is there a way to add a person to the staff to do that?
No, not realistically.
Oh, okay.
So do you want to keep this objective, or is it something that it's not possible at this time?
I would keep it. It's not to micromanage staff yet. Well, the idea is to explore
Yeah,
ways
how
to
do we
react
do it?
effectively.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Okay, so you've got 6 objectives for regulation and enforcement, which is very respectable. Do you want to add anything else, or are you ready to move on?
we're ready to move on. We need to open.
Oh, yes, public comment, sorry.
Sorry, we need to move on, we need to open public comment.
So we are opening for public comment on regulation and enforcement.
This is the next moderator. We are open for public comment. I'm sure we can open up the discussion. And we do have one comment that has been submitted by John Roshansky. Mr. Roshansky, I'm going to accept the request that was in your line. So if you can provide your comment verbally. There should be a pop-up at your end with the option to say unmute. And just a moment for the recording to start.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that I totally agree that I think having to deal with the legislature in any capacity is definitely seems to be an ongoing issue. And I would agree that if there's some way that we could work with DCA to somehow streamline that process or develop a standard process in order to do that, that would definitely be a big help. I know that the LATC has to go through the same process that the CAB does in regards to any type of changes that require legislative action, and any way that we can improve that process is definitely a big help. So that was basically, it was more just a general comment than anything else at this point in time.
So just so you know, John is the chair for our LATC committee.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said that.
Thank you, John. And we get to the next moderator. I'm not seeing any further requests for comment at this time, so we can close the public comment for this item, and I will leave the Q&A open for comments on the next area.
All right, so this is Sarah, just confirming that we're ready to move on to communications. And on your environmental scan, the summaries for that are going to be on pages 20 through 25, and then those comments will be on pages 116 through 145. I'll give you all a couple moments to look over those.
So if there's no objection, again, Laura and I will again put some thoughts we had before and for the discussion. Do you need more time to read? Oh, we're good? Okay. So Laura, I can start off this one. Okay. So a couple of outstanding issues we're already aware of in the past 2 years. I just want to get them out first. One is we had a good education institutional outreach programs, and we were overloaded, and then we dropped suddenly completely. So we see this is a very important element of it because multiple paths to licensure is strongly, a policy of California. So we want to have that to be a successful trade, and we like to see this group help formalize what is the more effective and practical way to continue that outreach. So that's one, and we also have some other issues, but let's start to put some wording to this first, is how about let's develop a plan, and for actions develop a plan, what is for outreaching educational institute, and in the following representative entities. I think that this time we want to be specific. We want some kind of representative institute for UC system, UC. And we want to have a representative institute for CSU, California State University. And we want community college, CCC. And we also want outreach to private institute, which we have not done very often before. And then why? Because as we said here, keep communicating with education institute, inform students and educators early on about their future path to licensure is critically important to many students, if not the majority students, because I know some institutes not necessarily building students to be licensed architect, but the vast majority of architecture program want to produce architects. So is that, I hope that's a fair assessment, Mitra? Yeah. So that said, I think the committee can, the board can talk about how we approach that. For example, one of my personal suggestions is for 1 or 2 years, we only identify one institute as our outreach partner. For example, UC Berkeley or UCLA is our UC system contact. To have a good understanding of their program the past year, past 2 years, how many students are thinking about licensure, what is the knowledge they are lacking, all these, what kind of California Architects Board can help. And then we choose the same representative institute for Cal State and the college. So that way it's not overwhelmed, but we still have that level of communication with all breadth of institutions. So that's something that we can look into that. Okay, so we can formulate the language later. And then another issue is with these are all communication issues. We need to enhance our social medias, right? And we talk about, we will formulate words later again. We talk about develop the videos that will very customer friendly. When the licensees log on, they can look at it. They will introduce the entire process of how do you get licensed, for example. And we have those already developed with collaborations of LATC. It should not take us too much resource to do that and to visualize that. We can do similar social medias about law and regulations, right? How do you practice architecture without, violates regulations, knowingly or unknowingly, and also good for public to know what are the acts of architects considered violation, what are not. So these can be also through social media. And other members from Allied Institute also urge us to updating. We usually produce the booklet for building department, telling them how to hire architect, what architects do, and proven to be effective in promoting building department's understanding of licensure is important. So we're asked to do that as well. I think that's a good resource, or a good area to put the resource in. Maybe the new approach will be electronic instead of print copies put on the building department counter. Maybe it's more social media based. And then Laura, you have a few issues about regulations like electronic stamps, right? You mentioned, and some other things, I think, yeah.
Bear with me a second. This was under communications.
Yeah, under communications.
Um,
And also the business code about 5536.
So those were actually under the prior under regulatory, the REC objective, which I
Oh,
bring
that's
up.
on the previous,
So
yeah.
maybe I can just briefly mention them here, but we don't need to add them, and we can consider whether to add them in the future. One was to revise in our regulations, section 136, to clarify that electronic stamps and signatures are allowed, and also to clarify Business and Professions Code 5536.4 to include electronic files as files that are, I think, protected or subject to those same requirements. So we
Yeah,
can just
sorry.
consider whether to add those at a later date, but we don't need to go back and discuss them.
No, we don't need to, but I suggest to put it here because it is all about education or communication,
Yep.
yeah.
And then you have reviewing the building official guide. And this is specifically, there was a request from AIA California to include additional information on design limitations.
Okay. Okay.
Fired up from Milza?
Thank you. I'd like to add to this section a communication with the universities and colleges that prepare our students for architecture and figure out where they are in terms of accepting U.S.-born students versus international students. Because we have, it is my opinion that we're going to have a void of architects in about 20 years or 30 years because our U.S.-born students are not being allowed, or there's no room for them to finish their program. And if we don't push that, I think it's going to be a problem for us in the long run.
Okay. So are you for suggesting maybe like a survey of the schools to see what they're doing and then determine from there?
Absolutely, and then we can figure out how to address that and maybe get the legislature on board to help us mitigate that challenge.
Do you want a separate action or you want to be an action of this educational institute outreach?
So as far as a survey, I think that falls under the, as an action item under the outreach plan that we have up there on that one also right now. And we can make a note of that.
I think that we should make it a separate action item so that it stands out, so that we follow through on this one more specifically, because we are going to have a challenge if we don't take action today.
In that case, what would you write as our action?
Thank you.
So
We'll start with a survey and then move on from there.
So survey would be the action to determine placement of foreign-born students versus U.S.
Right.
students. And I guess the benefit would be to understand trends for the future licensing population.
Right. Some of the universities that we've visited in the past have 70 international students versus 30 U.S.-born students. So I think that we need to figure out how to mitigate that so that we are opposite. Thank you.
I guess I want to be more mindful about the approach because I feel like we could pull the data from the universities directly. Do we want to not only know that information, which I think staff could probably pull, but also what are their plans to, because we always approach them like we want diversity, and their diversity answer was we have all these international students. So we need to really think through about what are their plans for enrolling more U.S.-born students into the programs. So maybe we need to think through more of what type of questions we want to ask them.
Yeah, I think it'll take more work to figure out exactly how we're going to accomplish this, but to get it captured, that's a good point, Ebony.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what influence we can have over the universities to change that balance.
I think we have to bring it back to the legislator for
And,
funding.
Even accreditation board of architecture is not able to change that because under the umbrella of diversity.
We're going to have to figure it out because it has to be addressed. and we can't-
I'm
and we
curious, I
can't-
agree with you.
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to do
Yeah,
it.
the
but
board doesn't have any.
There's a challenge, we can overcome it.
But it could be like, it would be a great issue if we find data to put into our next sunset report, like this is a trend the board has identified. We think the legislature should be aware of it.
Yeah.
And I've brought it in other, like, non-board, like, architectural board meetings, that this is not just, like, a professional, like, it's all across all universities in the state of California, in all areas, that there's not enough, you know, students going through programs that are, you know, from our, you know,
This is
state,
not
that this
specific
is.
to architecture.
Yeah, it's not specific to architecture, and they're aware of it, but we need to, like, bring, like, more attention to it, that this is, really going to impact this profession, and maybe others from other areas will also vocalize, like, we need to figure out what the funding issues are, or scholarships to support more students to get into our universities, because, there's a lot of money that's coming over internationally, which universities, help universities,
Right,
but
helps the university.
at the same time, there's going to be a gap for the state of California.
Yeah, but the pandemic is.
And the nation.
So I know this is not within our jurisdiction, but it's a very important issue. Just wondering, I don't know, it's Mitra and other people who are more familiar with the educational governance, how the university performs in terms of any quotas that they have to admit a certain percentage of U.S. students versus international students, or they don't have any limitations. They can hire 100% international students. Oh, no regulations whatsoever.
As far as I know. I've been to accreditation, you know that.
Can you speak up a little louder? Get the microphone.
Yeah, there is no regulation at this time, to control it on behalf of accreditation agency to control this issue.
So maybe I misunderstood. What's the question? I'm sorry, Tian.
The institute admits large quantity of international students. If this trend goes, is it possible to cause the shortage of U.S.-born, U.S.-trained architects? I think that's what the is concerned.
I have a question for the for our group that's putting up the chart. There's diversity, ethnic diversity. There's diversity internationally. What do you mean by diversity there? Could you be more specific? What you're putting
the
down?
word that we heard thrown out. We don't have to put diversity if you don't want to. It could mean ethnic. It could mean
Equity, inclusion.
yeah. We could put be more inclusive.
No, actually, on this section, under the survey section, it's not as necessary to put DEI, it's more necessary U.S.-born students. The challenge is that the students that are coming here to study, which I applaud, they're taking their talent back with them, and it's going to be a void in the United States. So we need to figure out how to mitigate that so that we are not caught off guard in 20 years and we're like, oops, like we did with the medical doctors and we're doing with nurses and all the other professions that we need.
So is that not market-driven? Is that this society is all about? For example, it's a bigger question, right? Can we regulate that? Do we have a device?
That's what we'll look into, I guess.
I don't know that we can regulate it, but I think maybe the legislator can think about funding or scholarships to encourage the support of bringing in more U.S.-born.
I had another point that I was going to make under communication, and not to digress, and we can certainly come back to this, but when it comes to educating the consumer, I find it interesting. 2 days ago, I actually went to the internet and I basically typed in hiring an architect. Oddly enough, CAB came up 6 in the search engine, AIA came up 12. So everything else, there's so many other sources for that to answer that question. I also typed in hire architect versus designer, and we were even further down the chain. So the question for me is that how do we facilitate getting ourselves ahead of that, so that if the consumer is looking for an architect, understanding what an architect is, a source like the California State Board of Architects comes up first as opposed to 6th or 7th. Is there a way for us to navigate that? And so I'm not sure what the action is, but I understand the benefit. So I'm just curious.
I don't know, honestly, but certainly we could put that down and we could figure it out.
Yeah.
There is a way. You hire somebody and they put you on.
Money, no, but if there are other things we can do, we can work with.
You can simply hire
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
It's money.
But I agree with you.
Okay.
We should be the first one that pops up. You're absolutely right.
Well, our action has some effect. For example, the community college I was assigned to do a totally, literally they're not aware of architect. So, I mean, our action makes a difference. My personal experience is I was assigned a few years ago to a community college, and neither faculty or students are aware of this is the body to tell them how to prepare to get licensed. Amazing, yeah. So we can do lots of work by outreaching.
Okay, I want to go back to that survey one because we're having difficulty getting it all down, and I really want to go like in order: action, our issue, and then benefit. So our action is to survey, correct?
It is, but I think you might want to put survey institutions or educational institutions.
Okay, so
it's sort of-
survey, and then our issue is universities or educational institutions.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's, you have it.
Oh, they can't see the highlight, unfortunately.
Yeah,
With that, so keep what's in parentheses.
Well, I guess we can't direct the universities to do that. We want to see if they have it, I suppose, but.
I think we're serving institutions and universities to understand their plans for educating or creating space for U.S.-born students.
U.S. born?
Yeah.
Non-U.S. born?
No, U.S.-born.
US-born or US?
Or I should say be like admitting like a percentage to U.S.-born students.
Maybe not U.S. born, U.S. residents?
Yeah.
Oh, U.S. residents, yeah.
Yeah, U.S.
Residents.
Right.
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of US born, we're going to do US residents?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And let's make it
Can we
clear
say
that
California residents?
no, because it's
That'd be our focus?
California, yes, for sure.
I like
And
California residents better, yeah. And it's also more politically correct.
can we also do not just universities, colleges that have the pre-courses for architecture or grad school, please?
So maybe instead of universities, we just say educational institutions? Okay, that way we kind of have like, it's a catch-all. Thank you.
Do you want to say higher education
Higher
institution?
educational institutions? Okay. No high school.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and then the benefit is to mitigate a vacuum of mitigate the vacuum of professionals in the future, correct?
Right. Well, I feel that it is our responsibility as a board to keep the legislature abreast of what we're seeing, because they're not out there. We're out there. We're talking to the universities and the colleges on a regular basis, and I feel it's our responsibility to let them know what and how. So this will help us provide that communication to the legislature. Then it's their responsibility to take care of it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we do have a couple other objectives on here that are a little bit incomplete. Are there any of these that we want to keep or continue adding benefits to?
Wasn't there one that got omitted after this one?
It might be on the previous slide. One moment. Oh, you're gonna have to click there and then
Okay.
click back.
So let's help to complete a couple of actions.
So we have resumed, so we had three that we developed during, I believe it was professional qualifications, which was resume regular communication with AIA by attending joint meetings once a year. And the benefit for that was to give a consistent message to our architects, candidates, and consumers in California. We all like that? Green card?
Okay, for now.
Good?
I thought we had said that on develop and partner, that we're going to partner with DCA to create videos and to create a communication source.
Yeah, it's
So
down
we
below,
have
down
develop
below.
and partner.
It's a second page. We have lots of items, yeah.
Sorry.
Second,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
They said it's on the second page, so I'm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna double check that it is on the second page. One second. Did you click up? Can you click on the? Oh no, what happened? Ah, there we go.
Which one is it?
Thank you.
Okay, which
So we
page
do have
you,
it?
yeah.
Okay.
Which page you want us to finish?
Let's
wording?
finish this page first.
Okay, okay. What are the wordings not finished?
Well, there's a lot of comments in the weaknesses sections about our communications committee.
Yep.
And so I think we should have a discussion of that and put something on our chart regarding the committee. Are they meeting enough? And what are their proactive goals for the year? And maybe we should talk about those and put those on the chart on their own.
First, before editing the incomplete one. Okay, that's fine. So we change our direction. We are adding more concerns or actions here, okay? Anything particular, Brett, you want to start with?
Well, how often do most of our committees meet?
Well, I can tell you,
And compared to our communications committee?
They meet about twice a year.
So shouldn't our communications committee meet at least twice a year? And I just wonder, given how many things we've listed under communications in the last hour, whether 2 is even enough if we're trying to overcome past lack of action by our communication committee, because we put a lot on the chart regarding communications for our communications committee. Is 2 enough?
Brett, let's convert to action. How about the minimum, at least I think it's applicable, Laura, for next year, minimum, next 2 years even, minimum two meetings a year.
yeah, maybe even quarterly.
Yeah, I
Because-
don't think we need to specify it in this plan, but that is something for us to consider. And I think we'll develop a plan, once we have an approved strategic plan for the next couple of years, we'll develop kind of like an action plan of how to implement it. And as part of that, we'll kind of determine how often the committee should meet to get it done.
I
So I
think
think
it's-
that's a good point. We need to consider that, but I'm not sure we can decide it right
Yeah,
now.
that's correct. And we did come up with that objective in, what was it? Organizational relationships and effectiveness to reevaluate and kind of synchronize those committees. That could be a step in that,
Yeah,
under that.
I know we put synchronized, but I didn't see that we put in that box, discuss number of meetings per year.
I think that'll
We
be
did
more, it won't be an actual objective, but it'll be an implementation of the plan. We'll determine
Yeah,
how
we-
often the
Okay.
committees meet.
Yeah, we have to.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, to meet in the same quarter. We could revise that so it's a little bit more broad, and then as an action item can be add more meetings.
Yeah.
Add more, yeah.
Yeah.
See, I think the other committees don't have to meet as often because those things are much more, they're long strategic things.
Long-term.
Right, but communication has got to be more often. When I
Yeah.
was on the committee, we met once a year, and I felt like we had good discussions, but then we couldn't follow up on anything because we
Yeah.
didn't see each other again for another year. And that just has to change.
So I know that this is like something that Denise is super passionate about. And I know the committee has done a lot with our social media platforms, but there's a lot of ask that the committee would like to see and see through. And so it's definitely meeting more often, I think will be more effective to make sure that the ideas that get brought up during those committees are actually completed if we're, in touch more than once and even more than twice a year.
Yeah, so the committees can definitely meet more often. I think, though, it's important to remind the members in the committees that the committees are there to implement the strategic plan objectives, and then to the extent that there's room left or bandwidth left to do more after that, the committees can take that on, but the primary purpose is to implement the ideas that you are developing right now versus new ideas that the committees themselves come up with.
All right, so before we move on, I just want to confirm that we're okay with these objectives that are on this first slide. All good?
I think it's okay. Staff will,
Yeah, screen
staff
shared. Okay.
will.
We're going to go to our second slide where we still have a little bit of workshopping to do. Give us one moment while we switch the slides. So that first one, develop education videos on how to get licensed. What would be a benefit for that one?
educate, to inform, how do you call it? Candidates and, general public too, and consumers, because they want to know, take what to get licensed. Okay.
Okay, so to inform candidates and consumers on how to get licensed.
Yeah.
Okay?
Can we make that a little more flexible and maybe just add graphics, education videos and graphics?
Yeah.
You know, not to overwhelm with video production.
Yeah.
Videos would be great, but
Also,
I also think there's a lot of information that we
how
could get out
about,
really quickly
or
graphically.
say videos and other social medias or something, yeah?
Yeah, I think that DCA has an amazing studio and has staff that can do this. I think it's not such an
I'm
overwhelming.
not hiring people to do it,
Yeah, we're not doing it.
internal.
DCA has awesome
And Laura, you probably,
studios.
sorry.
But it's not just how to get a license, but all the other challenges that come up. For instance, what to be aware of when we have fire season, and what to be aware of when we have flooding, and they have to rebuild, and
Maybe
all of
topics
those
of
things.
interest?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
That
Topics
way
of
we don't
interest.
have to
That sounds good.
specify.
They're almost like PSAs.
That,
Right.
yeah,
But Laura might know
right.
better than me, but I know for a fact that NCARB has an incredible studio. Talk about good studios. I mean, they have such resources. I'm wondering, would they ever be willing to assist us?
I don't know. That's a good question. DCA does have some resources as well, but certainly I think we could look and see it. NCARB is always very helpful to assist us when we've asked in the past, so that's a good suggestion.
So Sylvia will put the task right on you, you're the board member.
Oh, yeah. I forgot.
And I had a red card from Ebony.
So one thing I want to add for communications is,
Sorry. I just want to make sure that our consumers are able to access information in multiple languages. So I would like to make sure that is on the strat plan.
So we want to provide information in multiple languages.
Mm-hmm. Do we have proactive media?
I would also
To
encourage us
increase
to,
accessibility. Oh, I apologize, go ahead.
I would also encourage us to look at other resources for this information. I know the IAA has what's called Architects Help website, and they have a lot of this material there. I know the Governor's Office on Disaster Recovery has a lot of this material there as well. So there are other sources for these videos that you can find that have already been developed.
Right, and you can just put a link on ours.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
I have a question to fill in something here. Under update booklets, ebooks, and also under educational videos, is the benefit not also, aren't we also trying to increase the number of architects? And, you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect a great deal, and I was told, you have to be great at math and get an A+ in math, and if you're not really good in math, forget about it. And then I forgot about it, so for obvious reasons. And then my sister became an architect, and she said, no, I wasn't good in math. You don't have to be A+ in math. That's misinformation. So for that reason, under booklets and e-booklets, and maybe adding to the benefits under education videos, perhaps we should put something like increase awareness of what it takes to be an architect. Aren't we trying to increase the number of our national architects?
Yep. We lost a whole generation after '08. And we're still looking, I know that my firm is, and I've heard of other firms that are missing that project manager role, the tenure, because they all left during the '08 recession, Great Recession. And so it's a problem.
Okay. I'm jumping for a housekeeping item. I know one member have to leave a little early before 4. Are all other members okay to stay until 4?
Two of us have to leave around 3:30, the San Diego contingent.
Okay.
Okay. Well, so here's our second slide. If we can get through this, we only have one more goal area, and then we're done.
Okay.
So
Can I add one other thing? I
we
think
want
that
to add one more objective?
Under yes, under
Okay,
communication.
I just want to let you know that we are at, what, 9?
Yeah, this is just adding a list. I suspect we're going to shortlist this
We can, yeah, when
at
the
some
draft.
point because it is a lot. But just in the interest of diversity, I think that we should also use this. I said to someone, I spoke at a high school the other day, and I mentioned to them that as an African American, I didn't recognize another black architect until I was in college. And so I think trying to spotlight ethnic and gender minorities is a really important part of advocacy for diversity. And I would even basically say, just looking at across the sort of minority sector, and I say minority not necessarily just in ethnic or racial minorities, but I just think it's an opportunity to use this platform to do that as well.
In the social
Here,
media.
here.
Yes.
I really like the idea.
I'll screenshot that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you said that,
Yeah. So,
would it be like at like the high school level, kind of promoting it more? or-
social media.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
As I said before, we're talking the LBGT.
Mhm.
It's a much broader application that basically say to everyone out there in the ether that there are opportunities, and here are people who you can model yourself after.
right.
So I like that comment a lot because it sort of encompasses what all of you guys have been talking about, and it gets to the heart of what we're actually capable of doing. A lot of the other action items are very difficult, sort of cumbersome process, but the communication that we can put out immediately about diverse communities participating in architecture, and also just educating the public on the path, making it seem easy, putting the like sort of breaking down the barriers instead of increasing them, and just sort of educating, I think will sort of is part of the action of each one of these categories. So I think that's something that we can do immediately.
Right, and the low-hanging branch, believe it or not, is something I read in here that's several comments said, the board is so opaque, we don't know who these people are, we never hear from them. Why not talk about the board? You know, each month feature one of the board members and say, meet your board. And look, we are the most diverse board in the entire country, bar none. And so let's do that. I think that's a great idea.
I always try to have a fun, say something. I said, Ron's comments try to lead to highlights all these board members right here because he's looking for diversity.
Look no further.
But anyway, yeah, that's true. It's action louder than words, right? It's interesting. You look at it, the board is very diverse. So
Yeah,
anyway.
it kills two birds with one
That's
stone,
interesting.
to borrow a terrible
So my
analogy.
concerns, Neil, so you have to allow foreign-born, U.S.-educated people to practice architecture. Otherwise, I have to go back to my country. So,
Me too.
Yeah.
I was born in Hong Kong.
That's why it clarified, it's residents of the United States.
All right, so we have 10 objectives under communications, ready to move on to organizational relationships and effectiveness.
Public comment.
Oh, I
Public
apologize. Yes,
comment.
we do need to take public
That's
comment
right.
at this time.
yes, we are open for public comment, and after that, we will move to the next objective area, which is organizational structure.
This is the next moderator. And just as a reminder to our members of the public, our Q&A panel is open. If you want to make a comment on the discussion that we just had for the communications goal area, you can click on that Q&A icon, type your comment into the text field, and send it back to our panel. And not seeing any requests for comment at this time, again, I will leave the Q&A panel open, so members of the public can continue to post comments or questions as they arise as we continue through your last goal area.
Okay?
All right, so we'll be moving on to our last goal area, organizational relationships and effectiveness. Once again, your summary will be on pages 26 through 31, and comments will be on pages 146 to 162. We'll give you guys a moment just to review those comments and summaries, and then we'll go on to objective development.
Do you think that it should further the interest of architects, even though we're projecting? They need to be educated. They need to understand what we do.
All right, just confirming if we are ready to go ahead and start with objective development here. I need a little bit more time.
Yeah, we probably will do the same format. If the member think you had the opportunity to glance through what you read. Laura and I have some topics we want to share with you. If you think it's ready, we can, okay. Okay, so a couple of things. One is LATC, Landscape Architecture Technical Committee, okay, has been with the board for a few decades. And we see a benefit of streamline many organizational and procedural element, and in a way, so the two organizations really align, become one, because essentially it is a one organization, and LTC is theoretically a subcommittee of it. We have enjoyed the same cycle of sunset review, and we have, two separate strategic plan, and we just don't see the necessity of it. By aligning more and more the business and the enforcement and other business process with each other, we see a benefit of likely financial resource and staff resource, and also, most importantly, a consistency on the policy and enforcement between the two boards. Okay, example is like when the landscape architects took early step, set up a regulation they have to have a license number, right, incorporated into their advertisement. And the architects board takes few more months working on the same objective. It's the same legal requirement, same public outreach. Could be just one action, right? Just one example. So this is something Laura and I had discussed a few times. We like staff start to explore what is the regulatory behind this two entity, how much we can consolidate their functions. So how do we put the words here? That's good. Already had.
So we have streamline / consolidate, CAB and LETC.
Oh, wow, you're good. Wow.
Looks good?
You're very good, yeah.
Yeah, and the benefit maybe just to be a little more general, you could just say to effectively use resources instead of staff and financial.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I agree.
And Tia, in this regard, we've been, and I know that interior designers are governed separately,
Good topic, yeah.
but I would think that interior designers are more directly in line with architects and landscape architects with regards to the built environment. And so if most of Cal Green a lot of what Cal Green addresses are finished applications within built environments, but that's directly tied to what we create in terms of spaces. So how does that synergy work?
With interior designers?
Yes.
So they're actually not licensed at the state level. They have a private certification. So there's a private nonprofit entity recognized by the state to certify them, but they're not licensed similar to architects or landscape architects.
And so then how are they regulated with regards to the built environment? They're choosing tile, they're choosing carpet.
So it's a very good question, and it's something that the interior designers have come to the board in the past, and that we've had discussions with AIA California and interior designers, and there's definitely not consensus over what they can do, and I think the concern is that certain jurisdictions won't accept plans that are stamped by interior designers when others will. So we've gotten involved in the past, and I think it's still maybe an unresolved issue, so it's a good question.
Well, that's actually. This is actually a good strategic topic. I wonder if we should set this as a discussion point for one of the committee. I think we should prepare early on before, everything's too late again. Okay, so that's great, yeah. And then the second aspect is the business practice of organization, okay? One is certainly we want to work with DCA to implement the business modernization, which still in flux, but it's more of DCA and staff's role, right? Board have very limited input. So, but can we put this as objective?
Yeah, I appreciate having it as an objective because it will take a lot of staff time as we implement the new system, and it's also obviously taking a lot of our financial resources, but we expected great benefits to consumers, to licensees, and to staff, so, yeah.
But if we put pressure on you, how do you perform? It's really more of DCA's movement, is
DCA
it?
definitely takes the lead on it, but I think we need it on there to recognize kind of how important it is to get it done, and also to recognize that, the commitment it's going to take to get it done from staff.
Okay. So together with that, you mentioned that the new licensing systems, like online licensing system, is that also DCA driven?
That's part of this, yeah.
Okay.
So it'll be a system that both staff use to do the work, in-house, and also to allow licensed applicants, candidates to apply online, to do more, to renew your license online, to make changes, to maintain your license, to make it easier for consumers to submit complaints online and do follow-up and do more electronic communication, like texting candidates versus mailing them hard copies of letters.
Okay. So there is a significant role staff can play. Okay. Okay, great. And then the third one, again, after that is all yours, also business practice related, is I don't know how many board member knows. many of architects' files are actually in paper and in folder, including my file. They actually retrieved one time to checking on me. So I think this is not acceptable anymore in modern days. In many ways, one is too behind, too laboring, and two is the reliability and security is not there. The fires, the flood will all cause these files damage. So I ask the staff look into, is it possible? Looks like we have some budget surplus. Can this board make an effort to digitize all the documents we have, use our existing budget, and then have these digitized file ready when DCA, the Ministry of Modernization come in, we can then be integrated, the data can be integrated with it. So
This is Sarah. I think part of the digitizing is part of the business modernization, and I might be speaking about that because I actually did your guys' the documentation for your business processes and then how it might look when they do actually get onto the new system. So I think digitizing the documents is a part of that plan.
The current records, all of our current records?
I believe so. I mean, you would have to contact OIO because I'm not part of that team anymore, but
We did leave it on there, but yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know offhand how much of it is built into it versus some types of data conversion we'd have to do. So I think it's good to put on there to see what we can get done. But maybe it will be done, and this would be an easy one to check off.
can we make this even short-term action? Verify and end. If there's not in the actual modernization plan, we want to scan them. How do we word that?
So maybe, let's see, migrate, that's not part of BizMod. Or maybe our action is to digitize all the files. All records and files. Okay. And then our benefit is to
All records of. Yeah. Well, let's say the goal is actually digitize all document files, and then whether done by DCA or by joint effort or by CAD, maybe staff will implement. Okay, so the goal is clear. Yes?
all records and document files, and then the benefit, I think the benefit's gonna be more for business modernization.
Okay?
All right, woo, okay, good.
So when you say, sorry,
Yeah.
when you say digitize, are you just scanning the documents that we have now? Is that what you're thinking, or are you thinking of going into an electronic type of system? Because if you are, we have to consider cybersecurity issues.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think we want the data to be accessible by our new system. But I clearly have no technological expertise, so I'm not really sure.
So-
I can comment just a little
Okay,
bit,
thanks.
just from my knowledge from working with Organizational Improvement Office, but I would not take my word as law, and I would confirm with them. But from what I remember, it sounds like part of the process for putting all the old records is actually inputting that data into the new system, which requires a lot of manual data entry. So it wouldn't just be scans, it would actually be entering that data in. But I would confirm with Organizational Improvement Office on that before deciding.
So I hope the digitize what we're talking about here is digital digitization. In other words, translate information into some kind of digital file, not just scanning.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what that office should be doing when they're doing the business modernization for you.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, good. Any other observations?
Got red card
Yeah.
from Robert.
Well, is that the first item, or is there another
Oh,
page?
I apologize, we do have a previous page. 1 second, while we switch over. Okay. So these are our other ones.
So I thought we wanted to add what Ron suggested, which would be to engage in the debate regarding the relationship of interior design to the practice of architecture, benefit for education and consumer protection.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah,
Just a little bit slower.
Debate regarding the relationship of interior design to the practice of architecture.
Yeah.
And the benefits are education and consumer protection.
So I'll take this opportunity to tell the board that I attended a 3-hour session with NCART board and the interior designers. And it was their board of, is it CIDQ, which is their licensing arm? Not licensing, sorry, certification arm. So it was on a national basis, lasted 3 hours, as I said, very helpful to understand. I mean, there's no conclusion reached yet, but it is going to, in my opinion, it's going to happen. Right now, it's, as we know, I think it's 3 states that have adopted some kind of a certification process for interior designers. So it's a matter of time. And so I think this is really important for us to engage in it. I did, Laura, tell them about our story, about how we met with, remember several years ago, the board met. And at that point, they weren't as organized. Now they have a national executive director. They have offices, office in DC. They have a whole board of interior designers that are all certified. So they're going to make it happen. And it's just, AIA is still fighting it, as far as I know. But each state, each jurisdiction's board like ours, they're beginning to sort of cooperate.
Yeah, they're licensed in several states, and there are several boards that are multidisciplinary where they license architects, interior designers, and more. So I don't remember offhand how many do. I can report back at the next meeting or send that info. It would be kind of interesting to know. And as you're right, I mean, California is sort of behind the trend in this area, unlike in other issues. So
Nevada was one of the first.
Also noted that is before this year, as Sylvia said, the NCARB, our umbrella organization, is actually in the position of opposing that interior design to be licensed. And now they are state neutral. They even facilitated a conversation. So again, these are something that the jurisdiction like us has to take a note because the national movement. So thank you for mentioning that, Ron.
I definitely think they should be licensed here. I don't see why.
All right, so
Can I ask a question?
Oh, I apologize, go ahead.
In one of the weaknesses was improvement in inter-unit communication. The units feel very disconnected. That's really a management issue, but can you just briefly touch on that and what you think that meant and what the units are, et cetera?
I think prior to COVID, I had monthly staff meetings for all staff, and so each unit could present updates. And so obviously we're not all together in person, so we stopped the meetings. And definitely, I can tell there is a lack of, communication. So I have to figure out the best way to solve that. I mean, we're getting back to more people in person, but we don't have everyone in the office at the same time anymore. So we'll explore, different options to fix that. But something I'm already thinking of, and I appreciate whoever made the point because it was definitely one of the things I let slip during this.
Any other initiatives that we should include in organizational relationship and effectiveness?
Going back to partnership or relationships with associations, is it possible for us to create a calendar of meetings and events, and if our staff is not able to attend them, then we can see if any of us can attend them so that there's more of a presence to build that relationship?
Oh, like for stakeholder organizations and collaborations? Sure, we could do that.
Yeah.
What are the other organizations that people are talking about in their comments, by the way, other than NCARB and AIA?
Is there anyone else in particular you're thinking of, Ebony? I mean, there's also local AIA chapters beyond AIA California.
I also mean just like other, if there's like Black architect organizations or like Latino, like
Other
any
professional associations.
affinity groups or just any groups or associations that we can just start building relationships and having a presence and people know that we exist. Also educating that we are a consumer protection board because apparently some people feel like they want us to advocate more on behalf of architects, which we do in some way by having, architects here to, inform us, but we are a consumer protection board.
The calendar's that's a good
There
idea.
are a lot of events happening by ACSA.
By what?
ACSA,
What
Association
is that?
Collegiate Schools of Architecture.
Oh, ACSA, yeah.
And also AIAS,
What is that?
AIA student.
Yeah, so all of those.
Getting back to communication and Ebony's comment, the representation of the affinity groups on the California Architects Board social media platforms is powerful. So like we should definitely be doing that.
And then
Those are people that we should be like, also saying like, hey, this is an architect. If we build those relationships, we can feature those architects as well on our social media. So if students are following, our kids are following, then they know not just historical figures that are in the profession, but current day figures that are making a difference in the profession.
Well, I think those organizations would like a little more attention, and I think we should get to know them better. Why not have one after another make a 10-minute presentation at our meetings over time? And make the invitation. They don't have to accept it, but that would give them more attention, and it would provide us a lot of education. 10 minutes at a meeting would be really nice, every meeting.
Yes.
That's a good idea.
This is, Brad, this is very interesting. I don't know if it's overlapping yours or can be a separate item. Laura and I also talk about we need to keep in touch with our adjacent or nearby boards so we know in terms of regulations and professional practice, are we on the same page? If not, at least we know of. For example, all the major boards like New York, California is the largest board and New York is next, and we perhaps enjoy the same concerns, have the same concerns, and we can share. And the nearby boards could be just Oregon boards and Arizona boards. Somehow build the context that whatever the policy and initiative we launch are somewhat in the regional view and also the view of the country. So that's one. And on the same approach, maybe we should also have some exchange with other allied professional boards like contractors boards, engineers and surveyors boards, to look at any uniqueness of their law enforcement of initiative relevant to us. So, so we call this exchange,
Do you think the facilitators could go back and include this in the communications portion of the charts?
The collaborate one?
The last two comments, mine and
I did want to go back to the one about promoting individuals. I just want to make sure that we have the collaborate with similarly allied. Okay, so
That's
let's
still
go
an
back to
organizational
communication.
relationship, though, isn't it?
Yes, it's
Oh,
Yeah.
or you've under organizational
I
relationships.
think we
Okay.
would keep that in this category.
Yeah,
don't you think?
Okay, we'll keep
So
it
many
that
of
way.
these things are communication, right?
Sure.
But
in other words, invite the affinity groups to give short presentations at each meeting.
Okay, so invite affinity group. Wait, I think it's affinity, like AFF. Yeah.
I think, do we agree what we mean by affinity groups?
Yeah.
LGBTQ, Black architects, whatever there is out there. Yeah.
And also take advantage of if governors continue permitting this hybrid format of meeting, these communication become much easier. They don't have to physically travel. We can even invite once a year New York's board give us a presentation. Their annual summary of their concerns and issues.
Okay, and then can we add a benefit to this one to better understand or like to promote?
Well, I would say that it is to bring what they do to our attention and to bring to their attention what we do. To bring to each other's attention what activities that we do.
So maybe make a, okay. To bring to our attention, to bring, okay. Maybe promote awareness of.
Awareness, yeah.
Awareness of each other's activities.
To make sure we're not practicing in a vacuum, right? We practice in a context of broad.
And maybe foster collaboration?
Yes.
There we go.
Awareness of each other's activities and foster collaboration.
All right. I think we. And then to go with the comment from earlier, did we want to clarify what the affinity groups were, or are we okay there? Okay, we're fine. Okay, cool.
But it didn't.
Yeah.
About other state boards getting their either.
I think we did get that one under organizational. It is the collaborate with similarly allied professional boards, such as CSLB and BPLG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know what those stand for. Thanks.
Oh, I apologize. So CSLB stands for Contractor State License Board, and BPEL stands for Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists.
Okay.
Also, I think the only thing that's missing is other
Also
states.
include other
Other
state
states
boards.
outside of California?
Yeah.
Okay. And boards.
For representative,
states
like the
outside of California.
New York is the largest one. See what issues they're dealing with.
Okay, cool. All right, so how many do we have here? We have 9, okay. So we're all good with these objectives that are here for organizational relationships and effectiveness? Everyone's tired, so probably yes.
What's our current sort of feeling about this sort of relationship and the voice that we have at NCARB? Like, should we be asking for more of a voice, more of a vote, a bigger, megaphone within that organization? I feel like they do an amazing job, and I love the work that they do. And we're really lucky that they're doing it all, I think, right now in the right way. But by using that organization and sort of subscribing to their testing, their oversight, we give them a lot of power. And I don't feel like there's a reasonable checks and balances currently as far as like what we could demand, what we could, require, even with an ongoing conversation about diversity. So again, I hate to sort of drop one there at the end, but I feel like that's still a really complicated issue for me.
Do you feel satisfied as to their changes as to diversity policies in the last 2 years? Because I never heard a report back on our attempt to do that.
Well, it's all in process, and there's certainly a lot of conversation going on, but only time will tell. But time is marching, and it doesn't change. Even if there's a change that's affected, it still doesn't mean that like we have sort of an equal voice to the sort of size of our constituency. And I think that's problematic. I just keep taking every opportunity I can to sort of push that back out there. I mean, it would be equivalent to like our sort of Senate system without a House. You know, there's no equal representation of our.
So you had indicated a few times, I put some thoughts to it. The moment, I think, within the existing bylaws and the structure of NCOB, California is doing very well because we have two of our own members on the board and participating in this major decision making. You're right. Like LATC, we don't have any voice in called a club. Council of Landscape Architecture Registration Board. So the situation like this could happen, but how to resolve it, I think it warrants a discussion. I don't know if one board, one jurisdiction can make these bylaw and organization.
What made me think about this is the collaboration action. And I feel like that is the only way we would ever affect change is with New York, with another jurisdiction that's as large as us, that has as much sort of power. And so that's what reminded me of it was the collaboration.
I think from my experience just going to an NCARB meeting and feeling like this is very scary, I think we just need to get more of our own California architects to like infiltrate and be more present in NCARB.
Oh, I agree.
And
but that's accepting
be in positions to like influence the policies.
You know?
And it like that's the only way I think that we can really affect the change.
I agree, but it is accepting a broken system.
It is, and
yeah.
I agree. For instance, we have 23,000 architects. Guam has 4, and we have the same voting rights as Guam.
That's true.
So we need to figure out how we can mitigate that as well, because it is definitely, we have the lion's share of the country's architects, yet we have the same voice as Guam. And we need to figure out what and how we can mitigate that so that we are providing leadership for our 23,000 plus architects.
I think you could bring it up, but like in order to change how even a policy would be to get more votes, we're going to need more voices there in order to do that.
Yeah, we should definitely start by checking in with the other states
Yeah.
so they can just ignore our conversation.
I think that working with similar boards that, like New York, will provide lots of insight. New York has quite a bit issues with NCOB as well, so that's very good first step, I think. Yeah, but meantime, I think we should take advantage of we have leadership in the board now from California. Take an opportunity to influence some of the major decisions. I think that's what the current benefit of next few years.
So that last objective that we have written there about NCARB, does that look good?
Well, I think it does. I guess I'm going to kind of piggyback on Sunny's point. I'm not quite sure if participation by itself is a strategy, because you're still going to be outvoted. I mean, if the Lions, it's almost like changing the House and the Senate, is that it's just the system is designed to protect those who are in power. And so the question becomes, why would someone vote themselves out of power? So I think part of it is, California at one point basically withdrew from that whole structure and had its own licensor. Then we went back, and so the power of participation is your power, and if you are unwilling to pull that participation away, then you're sort of conceding to the system that's already in place. And when I had the benefit of attending the meeting in Los Angeles, and it was evident to me that the ascension to leadership is a long road. It doesn't happen overnight. And so that's the system that's in place, much like it is in the House and Senate. So you basically have to get through this process. And in doing that, you're never going to do it in mass. You're going to basically be trickling. And so it's going to be a really difficult organization to shift. That's the first thing I would say. The second part, the only other comment I would make based on my participation at the conference is that Sonny mentioned the issue of diversity. NCARB did an amazing job at evaluating diversity, but there's no plan to solve the problem. And so I think part of it, and that was my question to them, so what's the solution? You've identified the problem, but no one is basically developing solutions to address the problem. So those are just my two observations.
I would add, I think I killed my microphone again, sorry. But, there has been discussion when this has come up before about the NCARB regions and whether that is still the appropriate structure and whether that serves to dilute voices like California. So,
Could you repeat that?
yeah, so when this has come up in the past, one comment I've heard is that NCARB is split into regions. And so a lot of things are done at the regional level, and that's how you work your way up to leadership. Like Sylvia did, is you start at the region, and then you maybe get onto the board. But because it's split into regions, it sort of serves to dilute the voice of boards like California, where we're larger, and you have to kind of get consensus in your region, and then you go to the full NCARB to make changes. But I think it would be worth exploring whether those regions still make sense and whether the reasons they were put in place many years ago, if they're still serving the members well.
They're like football conferences. And they're very unfairly drawn. You know, they don't really equal out.
Sunny, translate to some actionable items. I think we need to start a dialogue with New York board on this conversation. I know they had some issues with, we'd like to learn, yeah.
It certainly would send a message if New York and California threatened to secede from the union, so to speak. And create.
I'm glad you said it, Brett.
There was one something called what was that war called again?
Well, you know, it's interesting you guys bring it up, Sonny, because this is not a new concept. It's been tortuously discussed over decades. Never goes anywhere.
Well, and the evolution, if you look at the evolution of how we got to where we are today, it was like a perfect storm because you had the bigger constituencies that didn't really need the service, right? And so it came up with a very like-minded, smaller constituency, and it grew into an animal that overtook the larger constituencies that didn't need it. And so therefore, the values and the ethics and the politics of it are completely flipped from the reality of what is. And it's very clear. It happened in front of all of our eyes in this lifetime in the last 2 decades, you know? And so... And there's not a mechanism to sort of self-correct, unfortunately, because the voices are so marginalized.
Yeah, and if you look at the demographics of the current board, they're all from the little tiny states.
Yes.
And therefore, it's very difficult to move.
Exactly.
Their viewpoints are very conservative. Everything is fine as is. And when you try to make changes, you have to do it very slowly. But we have an advocate in Michael Armstrong. He gets it. Really gets it.
Yes, amazing. And they are doing like the work of the organization. It's really impressive. It's a marvel. It's kind of like hard to believe.
Right.
What a sort of system they've put together. It's really great.
Yeah.
As I'm talking, though, I want to just bring us back to the interior design conversation because that's exactly what's happening right in front of our eyes, and so we should be part of that conversation now instead of later. We shouldn't jump on later. Right. So again, just to bring it back.
Yeah, just it is 3:15. I heard we have a hard stop at 3:30, so I just want to confirm we're all good with the objectives that we have up on the screen. Yes?
3:20.
Yes.
I'm leaving at 3:20.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I just want to, at this point, we do need to take public comment. I just want to make sure we get through everything. So, public comment.
Public comment.
This is the next moderator. We do have a request for comment from Mark Christian. Mark, I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Mark Christian with AI in California. I did not intend to make a comment. I thought I was just posting a comment. I'll just, what it is, with the various architecture groups, AI California is happy to assist California Architects Board staff in identifying the contact information of the various groups. We are in contact with a lot of them. Happy to help you reach out to them.
That's nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, please. Okay. Shall we move to the, I have not heard any other comment. Okay.
I just have a few
Yeah,
slides.
we have a few more items, but the board members, if you have to leave, don't miss your flight or train, okay? Yeah. The train's okay, I maybe drive you home, but the flights are difficult. Okay.
All right, so we have a total of 30 objectives, and they're listed right there. And so at this point, we're going to decide how long do we think that it's going to take to complete all 30 of those objectives. Keep in mind that most strategic plans usually run anywhere between 3 to 5 years. So how many years would you like to take to hopefully complete the strategic plan?
3 years.
3 years? Do 10 objectives each year. We'd like 3?
3 years, I hope.
Okay, so we're saying 3.
I was just asking whether or not this list would be narrowed, and would it be something that staff would do and bring it back as a recommendation to the board?
Yeah, that'll be my next slide about next steps.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
That's
Okay, so we're gonna say 3 years?
Do you mind I interject, since 2 members has to leave, if 2 members and a full board feel comfortable, we'll let staff do some of editorial work, and with understanding they will not change the meaning and the intent of our list.
Could I make a request of staff in doing the editing? Is it okay if you redline to show what edits you're making so we can understand them without your having to explain them at great length, perhaps at the next meeting?
We can figure out a way to make sure that what edits are made are displayed so you understand.
That would be appreciated and save us all time next meeting,
Okay, so basically what our next steps are, I will be drafting that strategic plan based off those objectives that we developed today. And I will get that to Laura as soon as that's done. And then you will have that for a draft version of that for approval at your next board meeting. And then after that, we'll go ahead and move on to action planning, which is adding steps to those objectives that we created today. So at this point, that's all we have for strategic planning. If you have any other additional questions, this is Tricia and I's contact information. And yeah, that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
Shall we ask her to adjourn the meeting? Yeah, okay, so the discussion is completed, and now we adjourn the meeting. Question for Sarah, is it possible you can, or Laura, if we can distribute the slides deck to the members, is that something okay with you? Okay, good, thank you.